Esteemed members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hadley Roberts. I was appointed as an election observer by His Excellency the Governor. My fellow observers then elected me as head of mission to act as spokesperson and chair and coordinate our report. With me here today are some of the observer team. We have Trikata Young, Oliver Watler, Ian Wantong, Margot Laris, and our reserve member, Yves Martel. The purpose of this briefing today is to provide an overview of our observation, and then I will be pleased to answer any questions. I'm going to provide an opening statement, offer a few comments about the election, provide an overview of some of our recommendations, and then invite your questions. This morning, the domestic election observers met with His Excellency the Governor to present to him our final report. As volunteers, we undertook our responsibilities to the best of our abilities, in good faith and in the spirit of the observation's terms of reference. It is not within our formal remit or expertise to pass a simple thumbs up or thumbs down judgment on the election or to assert any kind of stamp of approval. We will not be providing a score or official rating because it would be beyond our power and our resources to do so. Our efforts were focused on monitoring and evaluating the electoral process as a whole, and we did our best to leave no stone unturned. To our knowledge, this was the first time that a team of domestic election observers conducted such a thorough and comprehensive observation mission. Part of the reason for this is that it proved very difficult to organise a team of professional international election observers who have conducted a separate virtual observation mission. Under our terms of reference, we shared information with the relevant international observers. It should be highlighted, however, that we were totally independent and separate from them with different resources and priorities. Having followed the steps set out in our report, we've arrived at several observations and recommendations to improve Cayman's electoral process in the spirit of its democratic traditions. With that stated and understood, we do offer the unqualified opinion that the election was held to a very high standard. We believe that the 2021 Cayman Islands general election was credible and legitimate, resulting, as it did, in an orderly transition from one government to the next. The Cayman Islands is a safe and stable democracy with a respectable record of consistently high voter turnout and engagement with the electoral process. In our observation, everyone can have full confidence in the administration of the election, the electoral process as a whole, and above all, another strong example of democracy in the Cayman Islands. Turning now to our observations on the election. We observed the entire electoral period from the 29th of March. This included mobile polling taking place on the 8th and 9th of April and polling day on the 14th of April. I was present in the command centre and the other 8 observers were stationed in one district to observe the opening of the poll. They circulated around the districts during the day and then observed the close of poll and subsequent count. On the legal framework of the Revised Elections Act, in tandem with the Constitution and other relevant legislation, set out clear instructions for the entire electoral process and, in our opinion, was followed accurately and forcefully. Where we have made recommendations, we make them not in the light of any observed breaches, but in anticipation of future challenges that may emerge. On election administration, the Elections Office was completely transparent regarding timely access to all information that we requested and at all times permitted observers to scrutinise election activities. They maintained excellent communication with us throughout the electoral period and welcomed our observation as an opportunity to demonstrate their competence. We commend the Elections Office as a whole and Election Supervisor Wesley Howell in particular for adapting to several difficult challenges with flexible and creative resolutions. These included preparing for an early election, managing deadlines around the Easter weekend, and above all, precautions and practices regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that the election regulations were applied fairly, uniformly, and equitably. On any irregularities, we did not identify or observe any illegal electoral activities by voters, parties, political competitors, the media, or the electoral authorities. We will not speculate on allegations made or any potential investigations. We did not identify or observe any attempts to influence a voter unlawfully, tamper with the vote or voting accessories, or interfere with an election official, and will not enter into speculation on such matters. On polling day, observers noted that all polling stations were clearly identifiable and easy to find. All polling stations opened and closed on time and maintained effective communication with the command centre. All polling stations were well equipped and had received all the necessary election materials to conduct voting. Observers found that polling staff had an excellent understanding of the relevant opening, voting and closing procedures. Polling was carried out efficiently and transparently, highlighting the integrity of the process. We did not observe any requests for a recount, suggesting that those involved believed the counting process to be valid and accurate. Observers were pleased with the level of accessibility and the thought put into selecting locations accessible to elderly electors and electors with other physical impairments. Now, moving on to some of our recommendations. Having followed the steps set out in our report, which include following to the best of our ability international guidelines and interviewing a range of people involved in the electoral process, we have arrived at several observations and recommendations to improve Cayman's electoral process in the spirit of its democratic traditions. In the process of our observation and follow-up conversations, we observed a general appetite for improvement in several aspects of political life and the electoral process to keep the system up to date. To be clear, our recommendations are not intended to be prescriptive. We have attempted to identify the main issues and then present a few realistic options. A lot of our commentary is to acknowledge points made to us during the electoral process, but it will be up to the new Parliament to decide what action it wishes to take, if any. I will leave the more technical and logistical observations and recommendations to the details of the report. On voter secrecy, the secrecy of the vote was respected and secured in all the polling stations we observed, and the Elections Office made special efforts on their website and elsewhere to explain how an elector's vote is kept secret. Regarding the change in the law allowing postal and mobile votes to be mixed and counted with the rest of the polling day votes, the Elections Office fought for this amendment, which did improve the secrecy of the vote. We strongly commend this change. However, changes to election-related rules should generally not be made such a short time before polling day. Concerns persist over the serial numbers on the counterfoils and the ballot. We understand why these exist in the way that they do. However, we believe that the perceived advantage of having the serial numbers is outweighed by the real and perceived effects of these serial numbers on the secrecy of the vote. On data privacy, we recommend a careful analysis of all the personal data that is collected on electors and candidates, and any other persons involved in the elections process, to ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act. We emphasise the need to make sure that the personal data gathered is necessary for the relevant purpose, processed and publicised in a manner that is consistent with data protection principles, and that appropriate notice be given to all data subjects about the use of their personal data. Now, candidates on polling days. Candidates rarely, if at all, appeared to act in bad faith on polling day or during any polling. Having invested a great deal of time, money and effort into the election, however, candidates frequently tested the limits of the no campaigning rules. Observers were concerned that some election candidates accompanied the mobile ballot boxes into the homes of vulnerable electors. The Elections Office rightly attempted to discourage this practice, but also rightly acknowledged that it was permitted under the law. Activities on polling day led us to recommend a few revisions to the ban on campaigning. These include prohibiting the candidate from the exclusion zone around polling stations unless it is to cast their own ballot. If this is implemented, all candidates should have a nominated person who acts as their official representative with the full authority of the candidate themselves. To compensate, candidates need to have greater freedom in selecting their agents. Overall, we recommend a clear framework that sets out the rights, responsibilities, and accreditation of candidates and their representatives on polling days. On politics and the political system. As a further update to the political system in Cayman, we recommend the creation of a body capable of dealing with complaints and disputes, as well as providing official guidelines on campaigning, the conduct of political organisations, and the role of the media in a way that does not extend to criminal offences. In the report, we have called this a political ombudsman to distinguish it from the local commissions, but it is up to the new Parliament to decide on its role and structure if it wishes to pursue this policy. On campaign financing, it is beyond our resources to recommend any specific financial structure. But it is clear that political financing is ready for comprehensive reform. It is up to the new Parliament to decide in which direction and how far it wishes to go to promote transparency and accountability in campaign financing, considering both income and expenditure. We recommend that political financing becomes a priority in any review of the elections framework. Our suggestions include greater transparency of the elected members' register of interests. We also put forward ideas for a register of political donations made and received, and a framework for lobbying and lobbyists would also seem appropriate. It may too be worth considering the role of third-party financing. Crucially, we observed a small loophole in the law that there is little recourse against unsuccessful candidates who fail to submit an expenses declaration, and so we recommend that loophole be closed. In conclusion, there are many reasons for the Cayman Islands to be very proud of its electoral process. Our observations have led us to a conclusion that the election was carried out to a very high standard. The Elections Office acted transparently and with integrity. Polling took place without interruption, in a calm and safe atmosphere. Overall, we hope these observations further strengthen confidence in Cayman's electoral system. Before I hand it over to questions, on behalf of the entire Domestic Election Observer team, we'd like to thank His Excellency the Governor and his office for appointing us and respecting our independence throughout our observation. We'd also like to thank the Elections Office as a whole and Elections Supervisor Wesley Howell in particular for their cooperation and willingness to share information with us. Thank you also to Government Information Services for helping us to organise this press briefing, and of course to the technical staff behind the cameras you never see. And finally, thank you, esteemed members of the media, for covering our election, our observation throughout the process, and of course today. I hope our overview has been sufficiently complete, and I'd now like to invite your questions.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Norma Connolly from the Cayman Compass. Just a couple of questions for you. You note in your report that the 2017 recommendations from the international observers, many of those recommendations were not taken up. Are you confident or hopeful that the recommendations in your report will have a different outcome?
That's a very good question. I wouldn't wish to speculate on why the recommendations from the 2017 International Observers report were not implemented. Some of them were, it should be noted. A lot of them were beyond our areas of expertise, so we didn't feel capable of endorsing or restating them. But we would recommend that when the 2021 International Observers Report comes out, I presume in a few weeks' time, that these are considered. To answer your question head on, we do hope that the new Parliament will set this as a priority. We've done our best to not be too prescriptive in our recommendations. We've set out by identifying various opportunities for improvement in the electoral process based on what we observed and based on what candidates and other relevant people told us. I think it's fair for me to say that we're reasonably confident that acknowledging the lack of action previously, there will be a more detailed consideration this time around. I think that's probably to be welcomed.
Okay. Does your report overlap in many ways with the International Observers Report? I mean, did you guys sort of pick elements that you would cover and different elements that international
No, as I said at the beginning of my
observers?
statement, we had no coordination with the international observers. We've done our best to essentially plug the gap by performing many of the roles that a typical international observation would undertake. For example, in the appendices of our report, we include the forms we had observers fill out every few, whenever was appropriate, when they arrived at a new polling station and things, to record their observations and who was there. And quite frankly, having been through the, I'm not sure how many pages there were of forms from all of the observers and all of the forms that were filled in from all the districts, I think we could probably, with reasonable confidence, tell you who was in what polling place at what time, how many people were there, and who had cast their ballots, how many people, rather, had cast their ballots. So we had quite a good eye on the system, I think.
I'd also just like to ask a bit more about the idea of a political ombudsman. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, it's not necessarily a particularly creative or unusual idea. We looked in particular at the UK's Electoral Commission and similar bodies. What we found is that the Elections Office entered into situations brought to it where candidates wish to make complaints or other comments, and the Elections Office was in the difficult position where it had to essentially adjudicate on itself, or it had to deal with its own actions, and that's typically it's not very easy for either side there. So we've called it a political ombudsman, but what we're really talking about is some kind of body, not too dissimilar to our observation, I suppose, that is able to look into certain matters in detail, to adjudicate disputes a little bit, and above all, what we found is that when members of the media, political competitors had a question or they wanted to raise an issue, they were met with relevant extracts from the Elections Act, which is entirely proper because that is the law. Such a body would perhaps be charged with producing guidelines. So, for example, I think it's Section 94 is the ban on campaigning. Now, a lot of the media and candidates were saying, well, what is defined, what is included in that? Because there are certain things such as get out the vote activities that are quite common in many other jurisdictions. So it's not for us to recommend which way these issues go. It's purely to point out that these could be questions that could be resolved in the future.
And just finally, I just wanted to ask, are we in a bit of a catch-22 situation where I know you've recommended that looking into the financing of campaigns and sort of the length of time you can spend on a campaign, that falls to the legislators to ultimately legislate upon, but those are the people who have perhaps benefited from that financing. So, as I say, is it a bit asking them to monitor themselves? I mean, is there another way of perhaps approaching that?
Well, ultimately, everything has to be based in law, and the law will come from the Parliament.
Oh, no. Super. Super. Okay, that's all for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wendy from Cayman News Service. Actually, Norma did most of them, so I don't really have too much. I just want to follow up on what she was saying about the campaign financing. Were you involved in the post observations, so the observations of the filing after the fact? Because it appears that there are some anomalies with it this year because of the PPM campaigning as a party, and they're a registered party, but they filed their finances as the Alliance as a package, which seems to me to contradict the election law. But I mean, I've only just discovered that today, so I don't know whether you guys were involved in the post-financing declarations.
No, is the short answer. We
Okay.
weren't involved in assessing the way that the returns were brought in, and we didn't have time, essentially. We didn't have time and resources to look into that in any detail. It may possibly be beyond our accounting expertise as well. We did look at the summary that is available on the elections website. Election Supervisor Wesley Howell emailed me straight away on Saturday, just in case we needed to look at it. It's not for us to comment on who filed what on behalf of whom, but you'll note in the report we address some of the situation regarding parties that are registered. There's only, I believe, 2 official registered parties, but visually, if you put yourself in the shoes of a voter, you can clearly identify a number of different political forces. Now, I know in Cayman there's a bit of a legacy issue with the term party. So we say political organisation, political grouping. Sometimes these are referred to as teams. It is, again, I'm afraid, up to the new Parliament what structure it wishes to implement. But we note that in the Elections Act, there are only a couple of sections beginning around Section 2526, I believe, that deal with the registration of political parties. But there's no real framework for when a party should be registered or how these organisations are governed. So that's also something that I think is certainly worth looking and producing some guidelines for.
Obviously, you submitted the guidelines that you think with regards to the whole bundle of campaign financing, which there are many problems with it. Did you also find that it was frustrating as observers that you were getting reports from people from the public, you were being asked questions by us in the media, that you were not actually given the power to address, if you like?
I wouldn't say we were frustrated. On the contrary, I think we welcomed all of the comments made to us, and we used these to provide a lot of background information to our report, so we can say confidently that our recommendations are based on fact and hopefully acknowledge a lot of the concerns and issues that were raised to us. It is just, I'm afraid, the nature of observation that you have to observe and you can't participate. So we weren't really frustrated in that respect. We did our best to explain our role as observers, and I believe that we have fulfilled that role appropriately and effectively.
Final question. You raised the serial numbers, of which it has been an issue. Can you explain what you found challenging about the serial numbers, what your concerns are about those, about having serial numbers like that? Well, just so the public understand what the issue is.
Certainly. I'll probably hand over to Ian in a moment, but as a brief summary, at the moment you have a small red ink serial number on each of the counterfoil and the ballot, and these numbers are typically 4 digits, and I believe they begin with 0, so it's quite easy to look at. Now, we don't believe that any breach occurred or that this is a significant issue, but we did feel that if you're looking for ways to improve confidence in the system, that removal of these serial numbers on the ballot itself would be a very positive step. Ian, do you have anything to add on that?
Sure. It reinforces the issue of voter secrecy. The secrecy of the ballot is critical, and on the back of the ballot there's a number, and the back of the counterfoil is a number, and the voter's own number is recorded on the counterfoil. So if one wanted to, one could trace a voter to a specific ballot, and that would compromise voter secrecy. We emphasized over and over, we never actually saw this it happen. It's a theoretical concept, but it's certainly possible. And when we asked the supervisor of elections why this was the case, there was a good reason, to the extent that it would be there to facilitate or would be able to prove to a voter that his or her vote was in fact cast and counted. But that reason seemed to us to be a small benefit in comparison to the challenge and the risk that voter secrecy would be compromised.
Thank you very much, Ian. Wen, did you have any further questions?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Is that everybody? I think I saw somebody else. Have they?
She left.
She left, okay. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, I think that leads me to conclude our briefing with the note that we, as observers, have been honoured to serve the Cayman Islands in this way. We are very pleased to have played a small role in the electoral process. We underlined the fact that the elections were conducted in a credible and legitimate way, and that everybody in the Cayman Islands has very many reasons to be very proud of their electoral system. Hopefully, our recommendations will be considered and evolved over the coming years, ready for the next election. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.